don't turn me away. I can give you what no other woman will," the Apache woman at the cowboy's door. The sun was beginning to sink behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the dusty plains surrounding the cowboy's small, weather-beaten ranch. The air was quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the dry grass and the soft chirping of birds settling in for the night. Inside the modest wooden house, the cowboy moved about with the calm efficiency of a man used to living alone. His hands were rough from years of work, his face lined by the relentless sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp, always watching, always alert. He had grown accustomed to solitude, finding comfort in the predictable rhythm of life on the frontier. As he finished stoking the fire, a sudden knock echoed against the door. It was soft but deliberate, unlike the random sounds of the plains. The cowboy paused, his hand hovering near the worn handle of his rifle leaning in the corner. Visitors were rare this far out in the wilderness, and when they came, they usually brought trouble. He squinted toward the door, trying to see through the dimming light. Another knock came, slightly louder this time, and there was a voice, soft but urgent. "Please don't turn me away," the voice said. The cowboy frowned. The accent was unusual, unfamiliar, with a musical quality that seemed to belong to another world. He stepped cautiously to the door and opened it just enough to peek out. Standing there was a woman. She was tall, with dark hair that fell in waves around her shoulders and skin that seemed kissed by the sun. Her eyes, sharp and direct, met his with an intensity that made him pause. She looked tired, as if she had traveled for many days without rest, yet there was a strength in her posture, a confidence that was impossible to ignore. "I can give you something no other woman can," she said, her voice steady despite her evident fatigue. "Please, I only ask for a place to stay for the night." The cowboy studied her carefully. He had learned long ago not to trust strangers too quickly. The world outside his door could be dangerous, full of bandits, wild animals, and people with bad intentions. Yet there was something different about her, a mixture of determination, honesty, and a hint of mystery that stirred a curiosity he hadn't felt in years. "I don't usually take in strangers," he said cautiously, keeping his tone neutral. "Why should I let you in?" The woman hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then she said, "Because I can teach you things you don't know. Skills that could keep you alive, help you survive in ways no one else can. I have knowledge that is rare, knowledge that comes from my people, passed down for generations. All I ask is for your trust, at least for tonight." The cowboy's eyes narrowed. He had lived a hard life, surviving by himself, relying on his instincts and the knowledge he had gained over the years. The idea of someone teaching him something new, especially a woman he had never met, seemed both intriguing and suspicious. Yet there was a fire in her gaze, a sincerity he could not ignore. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he stepped aside. "All right," he said, "you can come in, but don't think for a second that this means I trust you. You follow my rules while you're here." The woman nodded, a small smile flickering across her face. She stepped into the cabin, brushing dust from her long coat. The smell of earth and travel clung to her, mingling with the faint scent of herbs she carried with her. The cowboy closed the door behind her, the sound of the latch echoing in the small room. For a few moments, they simply regarded each other. The woman's eyes roamed the modest cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings. The wooden table, the single chair, the small fireplace where the fire still crackled. It was clear she was assessing her surroundings, calculating how to make herself useful, how to earn his cautious acceptance. "I'll need some food," she said finally, "and water. Then I can rest. I've traveled a long way." The cowboy nodded, moving to a small cupboard where he kept provisions. "There's bread and dried meat," he said, handing them to her. "Drink from the pitcher. That's clean water from the well." She accepted the food with gratitude, her movements graceful but deliberate. As she ate, The cowboy couldn't help but notice her keen observation of everything in the room. She seemed aware of every detail, every small object, as if she could read the story of a person's life by looking at their possessions. "Where are you from?" he asked, finally breaking the silence. She looked up, her eyes thoughtful. "I come from the mountains, from a place where the land is wild and untamed. My people have lived there for generations. We know the ways of the earth, the animals, the skies. We understand survival in ways most others cannot." The cowboy listened intently. He had met many travelers in his life, but none spoke with such certainty, such knowledge of the world beyond his small ranch. He found himself intrigued despite his better judgment. "Why come here to me?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Why not go somewhere safer where people might welcome you?" She met his gaze, unwavering. "Because I have a purpose," she said. "I have a gift, a set of skills that I can share with someone willing to listen, someone strong enough to learn. And I believe you are that person. I've traveled far to find you, not for riches or comfort, but because I think we can help each other survive. I can give you what no one else can, but only if you take the risk of letting me in." The cowboy felt a mix of suspicion and curiosity swirling inside him. He had always been careful, trusting no one, keeping his world small and controlled. Yet there was a pull, something he could not explain, urging him to listen, to open his mind to the possibility that this encounter was not random. "Fine," he said finally, sitting down across from her. "You can stay tonight. But in the morning we'll see if this is going to work. No funny business." The woman's eyes softened, a small smile appearing. "I wouldn't dream of it," she said. "I only ask for a chance to show you what I can do, to share what I know." That night, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered outside, they talked long into the evening. She spoke of her homeland, of the mountains, rivers, and forests that shaped her people's way of life. She described techniques for finding food, reading animal tracks, and understanding the signs of nature, knowledge the cowboy had never considered. In turn, he shared stories of his life on the ranch, of the challenges he faced living alone in such a harsh environment. Despite the differences in their backgrounds, they found common ground in survival, in respect for the land, and in the understanding that strength alone was not enough. Knowledge and wisdom were just as important. The night grew late, and fatigue tugged at them both, but there was an unspoken bond forming, a connection built on trust, curiosity, and the shared recognition that their meeting was more than coincidence. As the cowboy finally lay down to rest, he realized that the woman at his door had brought something into his life that he hadn't known he was missing: the possibility of learning, of growth, and perhaps even companionship. Outside, the wind continued to sweep across the plains, carrying the promise of challenges yet to come, and the sense that this encounter would change his life in ways he could not yet imagine. For the first time in many years, he felt the stirrings of hope and anticipation, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to experience for a long while. The mysterious Apache woman had arrived unannounced, asking nothing but a chance, and in doing so, she had opened the door to a new chapter in his life, a chapter filled with potential, danger, and the faint whisper of something more. And so, under the fading light of the evening, with the stars beginning to shine in the vast sky above, the cowboy drifted to sleep, the sound of the fire comforting him, and the presence of the woman in his home leaving a mark on his heart that he could not yet name. Morning came, slowly over the small frontier ranch. The first rays of the sun touched the dusty plains, painting the sky with soft pink and orange hues. The cowboy stirred from his sleep, stretching and rubbing his eyes as he tried to shake off the lingering fatigue of the previous day. His eyes drifted to the corner of the cabin where the Apache woman had spent the night. She was already awake, sitting quietly by the window, her eyes focused on the distant hills. The calm confidence in her gaze seemed almost otherworldly, as if she could read the land, the air, and the life within it better than anyone else. The cowboy moved toward the kitchen area and started a small fire to boil water for coffee. His movements were careful and deliberate, each one habitual and precise. He had lived alone for years, and the rhythm of daily life was ingrained in him. Yet today, there was a quiet sense of anticipation. He didn't know what to expect from the woman who had arrived unannounced at his door, but he knew that her presence would change the day, and perhaps his life, forever. The woman turned from the window as the smell of coffee filled the cabin. "Good morning," she said softly. "I hope you slept well." The cowboy nodded, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I did, and you?" "I slept enough," she replied. "Enough to think, plan, and prepare for what needs to be done." Her eyes sparkled with determination, and he felt the weight of her words, sensing that she was not here merely for shelter, but for a purpose. After breakfast, she stood and began to move about the cabin, organizing supplies and tidying the space in a way that made the cowboy notice her attention to detail. "I know I am a stranger here," she said, "but if you let me stay, I can show you things that will help you survive, even in the harshest conditions. I can teach you skills that your neighbors could never imagine." The cowboy leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. He had always been cautious, wary of anyone who claimed to offer knowledge or promises of improvement. "And what makes you think I need your help?" he asked, his tone edged with skepticism. She met his gaze calmly. "Because no one can survive alone forever. And because I have traveled a long way to find someone willing to listen. I know the land, the animals, and the ways of survival in ways you may not. But I cannot stay if you refuse to accept what I offer." Her words stirred something inside him, curiosity, respect, and an unexpected sense of trust. He had spent so many years relying solely on himself that the idea of learning from another person seemed foreign, almost uncomfortable. Yet, he could feel that she was sincere. Her eyes held no deceit, only determination and strength. "Fine," he said slowly after a moment of silence. "Show me what you can do, but understand this. If I feel you are wasting my time or putting us in danger, you leave. Do you understand?" "I understand," she replied without hesitation, "and I will prove that your trust is not misplaced." The morning passed as they prepared for a journey into the surrounding plains and hills. She explained the importance of observing the signs of nature, the tracks of animals, the patterns of the wind, the subtle changes in the clouds that hinted at weather changes. The cowboy listened carefully, realizing that much of what she said was unfamiliar, yet undeniably logical. Her knowledge seemed to flow naturally, not taught but inherited, honed over years of living close to the land. They set out just beyond the ranch, moving quietly over the uneven ground. The cowboy noticed how she could read the terrain, identify edible plants, and even predict the movement of animals without making a sound. Her skills were impressive, and he felt a mix of admiration and slight intimidation. He had always prided himself on his abilities, but here was someone whose understanding of survival surpassed his own. As they walked, she spoke of her people, sharing stories of life in the mountains. She told him about the traditions, the respect for the land, and the wisdom passed down through generations. The cowboy listened with fascination, realizing that he had lived much of his life without understanding the deeper connections between humans and nature. He began to see that her knowledge was not merely practical, but a philosophy, a way of living that required observation, patience, and respect. At one point, they stopped near a small stream. The woman knelt and ran her fingers along the water's edge, pointing out tiny tracks that revealed which animals had passed by. "These signs tell stories," she said. "They show who is here, what has happened, and what is likely to come. You can survive if you pay attention." The cowboy crouched beside her, examining the tracks with a newfound awareness. He realized how much he had overlooked, how his reliance on instinct alone was not enough to truly understand the land. She had opened his eyes to a different way of seeing, a way that combined instinct with knowledge, observation, and understanding. Hours passed as they continued through the hills, the woman demonstrating techniques for finding food, water, and shelter. She taught him how to identify safe plants, track animals without being detected, and even how to move silently across the terrain. The cowboy practiced each skill, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with surprising success. He could feel the sense of accomplishment growing inside him, along with a quiet respect for the woman who had introduced him to this new world of understanding. As the sun climbed higher, the woman stopped and turned to him. "You are learning quickly," she said. "But survival is more than just knowing how to move or find food. It is about understanding the land, respecting it, and knowing your own strengths and limits. You must be patient, observe carefully, and always be aware of what surrounds you." The cowboy nodded, absorbing her words. He realized that her presence was not just about teaching survival skills. It was about teaching him a different way of thinking, a way to live fully and wisely in a world that was often unforgiving. By late afternoon, they returned to the ranch, tired but invigorated. The cowboy felt a strange mix of exhaustion and excitement. He had learned more in a single day than he had in years of living alone. And he felt something he had not experienced in a long time, a sense of connection, not only to the land but to the woman who had opened his eyes to it. As they rested by the fire that evening, the cowboy began to see her not just as a visitor, but as someone who could change his life. He realized that her skills were valuable, yes, but even more than that, her courage, her determination, and her understanding of the world were qualities he had long admired but rarely encountered. The woman, sensing his thoughts, did not push or demand acknowledgement. She simply shared stories of her travels, her past struggles, and the lessons she had learned. She spoke of the hardships faced by her people, the dangers of the wild, and the importance of strength and wisdom. The cowboy listened, captivated not only by her words but by the way she spoke them, with honesty, courage, and a quiet confidence that inspired trust. As night fell once more over the ranch, the cowboy realized that this day had been unlike any other. He had started the morning as a solitary man, cautious and skeptical, and yet he ended it with a sense of hope and possibility. The Apache woman had not only proven her skills but had shown him that life could be richer, more connected, and more meaningful than he had imagined. He looked at her sitting quietly by the fire, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames, and understood that their meeting was no accident. She had come into his life for a reason, and he was beginning to see that reason unfold, not just in the lessons she taught, but in the quiet way she had stirred something deep inside him: curiosity, respect, and perhaps even a hint of admiration that he had not felt in years. The night was calm, filled with the distant sounds of the plains and the soft crackle of the fire. The cowboy and the Apache woman sat together, learning from each other, understanding each other, and slowly bridging the gap between their worlds. It was a day of discovery, a day that would mark the beginning of a partnership, one built on trust, skill, and the shared understanding that survival was about more than strength alone. It was about knowledge, wisdom, and the courage to open one's heart to the unexpected. And as he finally prepared for sleep, the cowboy knew that this was only the beginning. The Apache woman had come with a promise, and he could sense that their journey together was just starting. There would be challenges, dangers, and lessons yet to come, but for the first time in a long while, he felt ready. Ready to face whatever the land, the wild, and life itself had in store, with someone by his side who could teach him not only how to survive, but how to truly live. The days that followed the Apache woman's arrival passed in a rhythm both unusual and invigorating for the cowboy. Each morning, they would set out together into the hills and plains surrounding the ranch. The cowboy had long been accustomed to working alone, relying on his own instincts and experience, Yet now he found himself learning in ways he had never imagined. The woman's presence was a constant challenge and inspiration. She pushed him to observe more carefully, to think more deeply, and to consider solutions he would have previously overlooked. She taught him about the tracks of animals in the dust, the subtle changes in the wind that could hint at approaching weather, and the signs in the trees and plants that indicated the presence of water or danger. At first, the cowboy felt clumsy, unsure, even skeptical of her methods. But slowly, he began to understand the logic behind them. Her knowledge was not just practical, it was intuitive, born of generations who had lived close to the land and respected its lessons. "You see this?" she asked one morning, pointing to a set of small prints in the dirt. "These are not just footprints, they tell a story. A deer passed here yesterday. It drank from the stream at dawn. Another animal crossed here last night." By paying attention, you can learn about the world without even speaking to it. The cowboy knelt beside her, studying the tracks. He could see the patterns she described, and a sense of admiration and awe filled him. He realized that he had survived in the wild largely through force and instinct, but she was teaching him the power of knowledge, patience, and observation. As they worked together, the cowboy noticed more than her skill. He began to see her as a person, strong, intelligent, and resilient, but also vulnerable in ways she did not immediately show. She spoke of her people, of the hardships they faced, and of the knowledge they had preserved through centuries. She shared stories of survival, of danger, and of the lessons learned from living in harmony with the land. The cowboy listened, captivated by her words, and began to feel a connection he had not expected. It was during one of these excursions that the cowboy truly began to understand the depth of her abilities. They were following a herd of deer, moving silently through the hills when she suddenly stopped. She crouched low, her eyes scanning the horizon. The cowboy followed her gaze and saw nothing at first, but she pointed to a faint movement among the rocks. "Coyotes," she whispered. "They are stalking the herd, but they don't see us yet. Watch carefully." He watched, astonished, as she guided him on how to move silently, how to use the landscape for cover, and how to anticipate the movements of the animals. It was a lesson in patience and awareness, and the cowboy found himself relying on her guidance more than he had ever relied on anyone before. By the time the coyotes moved away, he felt a sense of accomplishment and respect for her that went beyond mere skill. Back at the ranch, the lessons continued. She taught him how to prepare the food they gathered, how to store it safely, and even how to create small tools from natural materials. Each day, the cowboy's admiration for her grew, not only because of her knowledge but because of her calm, confident approach to challenges. He began to see her as more than a visitor. She was a teacher, a partner, and someone who could change the way he viewed the world. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat by the fire, sharing a simple meal of roasted meat and freshly baked bread. The cowboy found himself asking questions he had never considered before, about her life, her family, and the world beyond the plains. She answered with honesty and thoughtfulness, never speaking of herself as superior, only as someone who had learned to survive in a difficult world. "You have taught me more in a few days than I have learned in years," he admitted quietly. "I never thought there was so much to notice, so much to understand." She smiled, a faint curve of her lips that seemed to carry both pride and warmth. "Survival is more than strength, more than skill. It is awareness, respect, and understanding. You have the strength, now you must learn to see." As the days turned into a week, their relationship continued to evolve. The cowboy felt a strange sense of comfort in her presence. He had always been wary of people, keeping everyone at a distance, but with her, he found that he could relax and trust, at least a little. They shared stories of their pasts, laughter over small mistakes in their lessons, and quiet moments of reflection as they watched the sun rise and set over the plains. Yet, despite the growing bond, There was an unspoken tension between them. The cowboy felt an unfamiliar pull toward her, a mix of admiration, curiosity, and something deeper he did not fully understand. The woman, too, seemed aware of the unspoken connection but focused on their shared purpose, teaching and learning, surviving and observing. One afternoon, a sudden storm swept over the plains. Dark clouds rolled in, and the wind howled as rain began to fall. The cowboy and the woman scrambled to find shelter, moving quickly to a small overhang in the rocks. She showed him how to use branches and leaves to protect themselves from the rain, how to make a fire that could withstand the storm, and how to remain calm despite the chaos around them. As they huddled together under the makeshift shelter, sharing warmth and fire, the cowboy realized how much he depended on her. Her presence was no longer simply a matter of curiosity or learning. It had become essential. She had brought skills, knowledge, and wisdom into his life, but she had also brought companionship, understanding, and a sense of connection he had long denied himself. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to a world washed clean, the plains glistening with rain. The cowboy looked at her, feeling a deep respect and gratitude. He had begun to see that her presence was not only helpful but transformative. She had opened his eyes to a new way of living, one that combined strength with awareness, independence with connection, and survival with understanding. That evening, as they returned to the ranch, the cowboy reflected on the week they had spent together. He had learned so much, not just about survival but about himself, about trust, and about the possibility of companionship. The Apache woman had brought a new perspective into his life, challenging his habits, his assumptions, and even his solitude. Sitting by the fire, the cowboy finally allowed himself to speak openly. "I have lived alone for so long," he said quietly. "I thought I didn't need anyone, but you have shown me there is more than just surviving. There is learning, sharing, and something else I can't quite name yet." The woman looked at him with understanding in her eyes. "That is the way of life," she said softly. "Survival is important, yes, but so is connection. We are stronger when we learn from each other, when we respect each other, and when we face the world together." For the first time in years, the cowboy felt a sense of hope and possibility that went beyond mere survival. The Apache woman had come into his life unexpectedly, and yet she had already changed it in profound ways. Her presence had taught him skills, opened his mind, and touched his heart. As night fell, the stars appearing one by one in the clear sky above, they sat together in companionable silence. The fire crackled, casting warm light on their faces, and the plains stretched endlessly around them. The cowboy realized that he no longer viewed her as a stranger, nor even simply as a teacher. She had become a part of his life, a presence that mattered, a person whose knowledge, strength, and understanding he had come to rely on. And deep down, he knew that this was only the beginning. The bond they were forming, built on trust, respect, and shared experience, would guide them through challenges yet to come. She had come to his door with a promise, and he could sense that her presence in his life would shape not only his survival, but the very way he understood the world around him. The night grew quiet, the plains serene under the blanket of stars, and the cowboy finally allowed himself to rest, knowing that with her by his side, he was not alone. The lessons she had taught, the skills she had shared, and the trust they were building would carry them both into the future, ready to face whatever challenges the wilderness and life itself might bring. The days following their growing bond were peaceful, but the quiet of the frontier was deceptive. The cowboy and the Apache woman had begun to settle into a rhythm, learning from one another and sharing small moments of companionship, but the vast wilderness held dangers that neither could ignore. The cowboy had grown confident in his skills, yet he could sense that something was approaching, a change in the air, a subtle tension he could not yet name. It began one early morning, just as the first light of dawn touched the plains. The woman had woken before him, as usual, moving quietly around the cabin, gathering supplies for a morning excursion. She was always alert, always aware of the land, and the cowboy admired her keen senses. Today, however, there was a slight unease in her expression, a shadow that passed quickly but left him curious. "Something is not right," she said quietly as he emerged from the cabin. Her eyes scanned the horizon with a careful intensity. "I feel movement." "There are others nearby." The cowboy frowned, adjusting his hat and gripping the edge of his rifle. "Others who? Bandits, perhaps," she said, her voice steady but calm. "Or someone looking for me. I cannot be certain, but we must be careful." They moved cautiously through the hills that morning, the cowboy following her lead. She taught him how to move silently, how to use natural cover to remain unseen, and how to listen for even the faintest sounds of movement. Every skill she had shared before now seemed more vital than ever. The wind carried unfamiliar scents, and the tracks in the dirt revealed signs that someone, or something, had passed nearby. Hours passed in tense silence, their senses heightened as they navigated the terrain. At one point they spotted fresh tracks leading toward a narrow ravine. She knelt to examine them, her fingers tracing the shapes in the dirt. "They are not alone," she said softly. "There are at least 3. They are searching, but they do not know we are here yet. We must act carefully." The cowboy felt a surge of adrenaline. He had faced danger before, but this was different. He was not only protecting himself, he was responsible for her safety as well. The bond they had formed made the stakes personal, and the weight of it settled heavily on his shoulders. They decided to take a higher path along the ridges, using the elevation to observe without being seen. From their vantage point, they could see figures moving through the lower hills. The woman's eyes narrowed as she tracked their movements. "They are looking for me," she said. "They have come from the south. They are skilled and determined. We must be ready for anything." The cowboy nodded, gripping his rifle tightly. Despite the fear gnawing at the edges of his courage, he felt a strange calm. He trusted her judgment, her knowledge, and the skills she had taught him. Together, they would face whatever threat lay ahead. The hours passed as they prepared, making traps and fortifying positions where they could seek cover if needed. She taught him how to use natural barriers, how to set small alarms with stones and branches, and how to remain hidden while observing the enemy. The cowboy marveled at her ingenuity, realizing that her presence had made him stronger, sharper, and more aware of the dangers around him. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the figures moved closer. The tension between the cowboy and the Apache woman was palpable, yet there was no panic, only careful anticipation. She whispered instructions, guiding him through each step, and he followed without hesitation. Her confidence was contagious, and he found himself relying on her not only for knowledge but for the courage to act decisively. The first encounter came swiftly. From a concealed position behind a large boulder, the cowboy saw one of the pursuers approach, unaware of their presence. The woman signaled for him to remain still, and he obeyed, his heart pounding in his chest. She moved silently, her actions precise, intercepting the intruder and guiding him to move away from their hiding spot. Together, they managed to evade detection, their coordination seamless and instinctive. After the first threat passed, they retreated to a safer position. The cowboy exhaled slowly, feeling both relief and awe. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "How do you stay so calm?" She smiled faintly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Experience and understanding. Fear is natural, but it must not control your actions. You use it, learn from it, and act wisely. That is the way to survive." The cowboy nodded, realizing that every lesson she had taught him was now a matter of life and death. Her teachings were no longer abstract. They were essential, the difference between safety and danger. As night fell, the threats grew closer. The cowboy and the woman moved carefully through the terrain, evading detection and observing the movements of their pursuers. Each step required precision, patience, and trust in one another. They communicated without words, understanding each other's intentions and acting in perfect coordination. During a brief moment of rest, the cowboy finally allowed himself to speak openly. "I never thought I would feel like this," he admitted. "I've always been alone, relying only on myself. But with you, I feel stronger, smarter, more aware. You've changed everything." She looked at him, her expression gentle but firm. "You have changed as well," she said. "You are learning to see, to understand, to trust. That is just as important as any skill. We survive not only through knowledge but through connection and awareness." Their bond deepened as they faced each challenge together. They discovered that working as a team made them stronger, and that trust and communication were as vital as any weapon or skill. The cowboy realized that he had come to depend on her not only for her knowledge but for her presence, her insight, and the courage she inspired in him. In the darkness, the sounds of the pursuers grew closer, and they could sense the tension building. The cowboy and the woman moved silently through the hills, using the skills she had taught him to navigate safely and avoid detection. Every step required focus, every decision demanded careful thought, and yet they moved with a confidence born of experience and mutual trust. Finally, after hours of evasion, the immediate threat passed. The cowboy and the woman found a secluded spot to rest, hidden from view, their bodies exhausted but their spirits strengthened. The cowboy looked at her, realizing how much he had learned in just a few days. Her presence had taught him survival, yes, but also trust, courage, and the importance of connection. As they settled by a small fire, the cowboy reflected on the day's events. The Apache woman had proven not only her skill but her bravery, wisdom, and strength of character. He felt a deep respect for her, a gratitude he had not expected, and a quiet admiration that touched him in ways he did not fully understand. "You've saved us today," he said quietly. "I can't imagine facing that alone." "You would have managed," she replied softly. "But together we are stronger. That is the lesson you must remember, not only in survival but in life. Trust, observation, and unity are more powerful than any weapon or skill alone." The cowboy nodded, understanding the truth of her words. He had lived for years relying only on himself, but now he realized that life was richer and safer when shared with someone who brought knowledge, skill, and courage into his world. The night stretched on, quiet and calm, and the cowboy and the woman rested with a sense of accomplishment. They had faced danger together, survived through skill and teamwork, and deepened a bond that was growing stronger with each passing day. The wilderness around them was vast and full of threats, but they had learned that together they could face anything. And as he drifted into sleep under the stars, the cowboy understood that the challenges they had faced were only the beginning. The world was unpredictable and full of danger, but with her by his side, he felt prepared, confident, and ready for whatever lay ahead. The Apache woman had not only brought him knowledge and skill, she had brought trust, courage, and a partnership that would shape their future in ways he could not yet imagine. The days that followed the confrontation with the pursuers were quieter, but the cowboy knew the peace was hard-earned. The Apache woman and he had faced danger together, and in the process, something profound had changed between them. It was no longer just about survival or learning new skills. It was about trust, respect, and the bond that had quietly formed over days of shared experiences. They moved together through the hills and plains with a new understanding, each silently acknowledging the strength they had drawn from one another. The cowboy had come to appreciate her presence in ways he had not expected. She was no longer just a teacher or a visitor. She had become a part of his life. He found himself noticing small things, the way she adjusted her movements to avoid disturbing the animals, the thoughtful way she examined the tracks in the dirt, the quiet confidence she carried that seemed to calm the world around her. In her, he saw a combination of wisdom, strength, and gentleness that fascinated him. One afternoon, they walked along a narrow ridge, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of a running stream. The cowboy paused, looking out over the landscape, and realized how much he had learned, not just about survival, but about life, trust, and connection. He had spent so many years in solitude, thinking he needed nothing beyond himself, yet he now understood that sharing his life with someone else did not make him weaker, it made him stronger. The woman noticed his pause and smiled softly. "You are thinking," she said. "What weighs on your mind?" "I'm thinking about how much things have changed," he admitted. "I've lived alone for so long and I thought I didn't need anyone, but now I can't imagine facing this land without you." Her eyes met his, filled with understanding and warmth. "And yet, you have faced it alone for many years and survived. You are strong, capable, and wise. I came to your door because I saw that strength and knew it could grow even more. Together, we are stronger than we are apart." The cowboy felt a surge of gratitude and admiration. She had risked her own safety to reach him, had shared her knowledge, and had trusted him with her presence. He realized that what she offered was more than skills or wisdom. It was partnership, companionship, and the rare ability to see the world through a different, richer perspective. As evening approached, they returned to the ranch. The Apache woman moved about, preparing a simple meal while the cowboy tended the fire. They worked together, their actions synchronized without the need for words, a rhythm that spoke of trust and mutual respect. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with warm hues, and for a moment the world felt still and perfect. After dinner, they sat together outside, the stars beginning to appear in the clear sky. The air was cool and the silence was comforting. The cowboy looked at the woman, his mind reflecting on the journey they had shared. From the day she had appeared at his door, weary and determined, to the trials they had faced together, and the lessons they had learned from one another. "You've given me more than I could have imagined," he said quietly. "Skills, knowledge, and something I never expected. I don't think I realized how much I needed someone to share this life with." She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a gentle, reassuring gesture. "And you've given me trust, respect, and acceptance," she replied. "We have both learned from one another. That is why I came to your door, not just to survive, but to find someone willing to understand, to share, and to grow together." The cowboy felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace he had not known in years. For so long, he had lived in solitude, guarding his life and his heart. But now, with her by his side, he realized that life could be fuller, richer, and more meaningful. Her presence had brought balance and harmony to his world, a sense of connection that he could not ignore. Over the following days, they continued to work together, tending the ranch, exploring the land, and deepening their understanding of one another. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth and companionship. They shared laughter over small mistakes, celebrated successes together, and found comfort in the simple moments, the quiet evenings by the fire, the shared meals, and the walks across the plains. The cowboy began to notice subtle changes in himself. He was more patient, more observant, and more aware of the world around him. He found joy in teaching her some of his own knowledge, sharing the practical skills he had honed over years of living in the wild. Their partnership was no longer just about survival. It was about learning, teaching, and supporting each other in ways neither had experienced before. One evening, as the sky blazed with the colors of sunset, the cowboy finally spoke the words that had been growing in his heart. "I don't know what the future holds," he said, "but I do know that I don't want to face it alone. I've learned so much from you and I care for you, more than I ever thought I could care for someone." The Apache woman looked at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight and the depth of her own emotions. "I care for you as well," she said softly. "We have faced danger, shared knowledge, and trusted each other with our lives. That bond is stronger than words can describe. You have earned my respect, my trust, and my heart." The cowboy felt a sense of relief and happiness wash over him. For so long, he had guarded himself against the world, against people, against emotion. But now he realized that love, trust, and companionship were not weaknesses. They were strengths, guiding him toward a fuller life. As night fell, they sat together beneath the stars, the vast plains stretching endlessly around them. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the sense of the earth and the quiet promise of tomorrow. The cowboy felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for the woman by his side, but for the journey they had shared, the challenges, the lessons, and the moments that had brought them together. In the days that followed, they continued to face the demands of life on the frontier. The Apache woman taught him more advanced survival techniques, shared deeper insights into the land, and helped him anticipate challenges before they arose. The cowboy, in turn, shared his knowledge of the ranch, the livestock, and the practical aspects of frontier life. Together, they created a rhythm, a partnership that was both practical and emotional, built on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. They also began to plan for the future, discussing ways to improve the ranch, protect their home, and continue their partnership. The cowboy realized that with her by his side, life was no longer about merely surviving. It was about thriving, learning, and growing together. The lessons she had brought were not just about survival skills, but about understanding the world, understanding people, and understanding himself. One evening, as the fire crackled and the wind whispered through the plains, the cowboy took her hand in his. "I don't know what challenges lie ahead," he said, "but I do know that we can face them together. You have given me something no one else ever could: trust, partnership, and hope, and I want to give you the same in return." The woman smiled, a warmth and tenderness in her eyes that mirrored his own. "Then we will face them together," she said. "We will continue to learn, grow, and survive, and in doing so, we will create a life that neither of us could have imagined alone." As the stars shone above them, the cowboy and the Apache woman sat together in silence, listening to the world around them. They had faced danger, learned from one another, and built a bond that was unbreakable. The frontier was vast and unpredictable, but together, they were ready to meet whatever challenges came their way. The cowboy reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple knock at the door and a plea for shelter. He realized that the Apache woman had brought more than her knowledge and skills. She had brought companionship, understanding, and a love that transcended words. She had shown him that strength was not only in surviving alone, but in trusting another person, sharing life, and facing the world together. And so, under the endless sky, with the plains stretching in every direction, the cowboy and the Apache woman embraced a future filled with promise. Their lives, once separate, were now intertwined. The lessons they had learned, the dangers they had faced, and the bond they had formed would guide them through whatever lay ahead. They had discovered something rare and precious: partnership, trust, and the knowledge that together they could survive and thrive in a world full of challenges and possibilities. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt truly at peace. He had found not only a teacher and companion, but a person who had transformed his life. And in turn, the Apache woman had found someone who valued her knowledge, respected her strength, and shared her courage. Together, they stood at the threshold of a new chapter, ready to face the frontier, the unknown, and the future, side by side.